The courthouse felt colder than it should have for a June morning. I sat on a hard wooden bench in the hallway outside courtroom 3B, holding a small velvet box in my left hand and our wedding photo in my right. 26 years ago to the day, I had stood at the altar with Marlene Whitcomb and promised her forever. Today, on our anniversary, she was inside that courtroom asking a judge to end it. I'm Daniel Pierce. I'm 54 years old. I'm a structural engineer, the kind of man who spends his life making sure things don't fall apart. And the morning of June 19th, I learned that the one thing I had built my whole life around had been quietly collapsing for years, and I was the last person on earth to notice. It started 3 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday, with a manila envelope hand delivered to my office by a young man in a cheap suit. He asked my name, asked me to confirm my date of birth, and then handed me the envelope and walked out without another word. My assistant, Carla, watched the whole thing from her desk. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The look on her face told me she already knew what was inside. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Petitioner, Marlene Ann Pierce. Respondent, Daniel Charles Pierce. Grounds, irreconcilable differences. There was a date stamped at the top, a court date, and the date made my stomach drop. June 19th. Our anniversary. She had specifically requested that day. She had asked the court to end our marriage on the same day it began. I drove home that night the way a man drives home from a funeral. I kept thinking there had to be a mistake. We had argued, sure. We had drifted, sure. But we were Daniel and Marlene. We had built a life. We had a daughter, Hollis, who was finishing her residency in Boston. We had a house on Linden Street with a garden Marlene had planted herself. We had 26 years of Christmas mornings and hospital visits and long Sunday breakfasts. You don't throw that away on an anniversary. When I walked through the front door, she was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of white wine, her hands folded in front of her like she had rehearsed the position. She didn't look up. She just said, very quietly, "I assume you got the papers." I said yes. I said, "Marlene, what is this? Talk to me." And she said the words that I would replay in my head every night for the next 3 weeks. She said, "Daniel, I don't owe you a conversation anymore. I owed you 26 years. I gave you 26 years. Now I'd like my life back." I tried. God, I tried. I asked if there was someone else. She said no, and I believed her, because Marlene had never been a liar, only a withholder. I asked if it was something I'd done. She said it was everything I hadn't done. I asked her to go to counseling. She said she'd been in counseling for 2 years and never told me. I asked her why she'd chosen our anniversary, of all days. And she looked at me for a long moment and said, "Because I want it to mean something. I want there to be a beginning and an end on the same calendar square. I want it clean." That was the word she used. Clean. I moved into the guest room. She didn't ask me to leave the house, which I later understood was strategic, not kind. We lived as strangers for 3 weeks. I made coffee in the morning, and she waited until I left to come downstairs. I came home from work, and she was already in the bedroom with the door closed. We passed each other in hallways like people in a hotel. I called our daughter Hollis. I didn't want to, but I needed to hear a voice that loved me. She was quiet on the phone for a long time, and then she said something that I have never forgotten. She said, "Dad, Mom told me 6 months ago. I asked her to tell you. She said she would when she was ready. I'm sorry I didn't tell you myself. I didn't know how." 6 months. My own daughter had known for 6 months. My wife had been planning this for at least 2 years of counseling and 6 months of paperwork. And I had been walking around our house like a man living in a museum, pointing at exhibits, not realizing the building had been condemned. I hired a lawyer. His name was Theodore Ashby, and he was a soft-spoken man in his 60s who had handled my late father's estate years ago. He read the petition, looked over the financial disclosures Marlene had filed, and then he looked at me over his glasses and said, "Daniel, before we go any further, I want you to bring me everything. Every account, every document, every letter, everything from the last 26 years that has both your names on it. Bring me the boring boxes from the attic. Bring me the file cabinet you never open. I don't care if you think it matters. Bring it." So I did. I spent a weekend in the attic, pulling down plastic bins coated in dust, old tax returns, insurance policies, the mortgage paperwork from 1999, a folder of letters from when we were dating, a box of cards she had given me, every birthday, every anniversary, every Father's Day. I read them in the attic by the light of a single bulb, and I wept like a child. Because the woman who had written those cards could not possibly be the same woman who had served me papers in my office. And at the very bottom of one of those bins, inside an envelope I had not opened in 26 years, I found something. Something I had completely forgotten existed, something so small and so quiet that I almost set it aside without looking. I brought everything to Theodore the next Monday. He went through it for 2 days. On Wednesday, he called me into his office, and he was holding that small thing in his hand, and he was smiling in a way I had never seen a lawyer smile. He said, "Daniel, sit down. I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Did your wife ever, at any point in the last 26 years, see this document?" I thought about it. I thought hard, and I said, "Honestly, no, I don't think she did. I don't think I ever showed it to her. I forgot it existed." Theodore nodded slowly. He said, "Then we don't fight the divorce. We let it proceed. But on the day of the hearing, I want you in that courtroom, and I want you to bring this with you, and I want you to let me hand it to the judge. Do not say a word to your wife about it. Do not mention it to your daughter. Do not breathe it to anyone. Trust me, I trusted him." Which is how I came to be sitting on that hard wooden bench on the morning of June 19th, 26 years to the day after the happiest morning of my life, holding our wedding photo in a velvet box and waiting for a bailiff to call my name. Marlene arrived at 5 minutes to 9 with her lawyer, a sharp woman in a charcoal suit named Priscilla Vance. Marlene did not look at me. She walked past me as if the bench were empty. Priscilla glanced at me with the professional pity lawyers reserve for the soon-to-be divorced and steered Marlene through the heavy wooden doors. Theodore arrived a minute later with a thin leather folder. He sat down beside me and said only, "Breathe. Daniel, just breathe." We were called in at 9:15. The judge was a woman in her late 50s named Honorable Imelda Crane. She had silver hair pulled back tight and reading glasses on a beaded chain. She had the kind of face that had heard every excuse a human being could invent and was no longer impressed by any of them. She read the file in front of her for what felt like a long time. Then she looked up. She asked Priscilla Vance to state the petitioner's case. Priscilla stood and laid it out, calmly and competently. Irreconcilable differences. 26 years. No infidelity alleged on either side. A request for an equal division of marital assets, a relinquishment of any spousal support, and the restoration of the petitioner's maiden name, Whitcomb. Marlene wanted nothing from me. She wanted only out. The judge nodded and turned to Theodore, counsel for the respondent. "Does your client contest the petition?" Theodore stood. He said, "Your Honor, my client does not contest the dissolution. He accepts that his wife wishes to end the marriage, and he will not stand in the way of her happiness." However, before the court finalizes anything today, I would like to submit a single document for the court's review. It is not a counterclaim. It is not a financial dispute. It is simply a document that has been part of this marriage since the day it began, and I believe the court should see it before signing any final order. The judge raised one eyebrow. Submit it. Theodore walked to the bench and handed up a single sheet of paper inside a clear plastic sleeve. He returned to his seat. He did not look at me. He did not look at Marlene. The judge took the paper. She adjusted her glasses. She read it. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the second hand on the clock above the door. She read it again. And then Judge Imelda Crane took off her reading glasses, set them down on the bench, looked across the courtroom at Marlene Whitcomb Pierce, and said 4 words. She said, "I cannot grant this." That was it. 4 words. The room did not move. Priscilla Vance turned to look at her client, confused. Marlene turned to look at her lawyer, more confused. The judge picked up the file in front of her. The petition that had taken 3 weeks and 6 months and 2 years of counseling to assemble, and she closed it. She did not slam it. She closed it gently, the way you close a book you've decided not to finish. Then she said, "Counsel, approach." Both lawyers walked to the bench. The judge spoke to them in a low voice for perhaps 2 minutes. I could not hear what she said. I saw Priscilla Vance's face change 3 times. I saw Theodore stay perfectly still. When the lawyers returned to their tables, Priscilla sat down next to Marlene and whispered something in her ear, and I watched my wife of 26 years go absolutely white. The judge addressed the courtroom. She said, "This court is not refusing to dissolve this marriage forever. It is refusing to dissolve it today, on these papers, under these terms. The petitioner is free to refile after she has reviewed the document just submitted to the court and conferred with her counsel. This matter is continued. We are adjourned." The gavel came down. It was 9:41 in the morning. I want to tell you what was on that piece of paper. I owe you that. I have been telling you this story for a long time, and I have not yet told you the 4 words the judge read, or what made her close the file. 26 years ago, 3 days before our wedding, Marlene's grandmother, a woman named Eunice Whitcomb, had pulled me aside at the rehearsal dinner. She was 84 years old, sharp as a paring knife, and she did not entirely trust me yet. She handed me a folded piece of paper and told me to sign it. She said it was a tradition in the Whitcomb family, going back 4 generations, that the man marrying into the family signed a private promise. Not a prenup, not a legal contract in the usual sense. A vow, written in plain language, witnessed by the family matriarch, kept in a sealed envelope. I signed it without really reading it, because I was 28 years old and in love, and I would have signed anything she put in front of me. Eunice folded the paper, put it in an envelope, sealed it with wax, and pressed it into my hand. She said, "You keep this, Daniel, not me. If you ever forget what you promised, you open it. If she ever forgets what she's owed, she opens it. But until one of those things happens, it stays sealed." I put it in a drawer. I forgot about it. Eunice died 11 years later. The envelope ended up in a plastic bin in the attic, unopened for 26 years. What Theodore had found, and what I had handed to him without understanding its significance, was that envelope, still sealed. The wax intact. The handwriting of a woman who had been dead for 15 years on the front, in faded blue ink, to be opened only in the presence of both parties to the marriage of Marlene Ann Whitcomb and Daniel Charles Pierce. Inside, on a single sheet of paper, in my own 28-year-old handwriting, were the words I had signed. The vow Eunice had written out for me and made me copy in my own hand. It was not a prenup. It had no legal force in any conventional sense. But it was signed, dated, witnessed by Eunice Whitcomb and by Marlene's father, Conrad, who had also passed away by then. The 4 words the judge read aloud, the 4 words that made her take off her glasses and close the file, were the 4 words at the top of the page, written in my own hand in the looping, uncertain script of a young man on the night before his wedding. The 4 words were, "Before God and family." And underneath those 4 words was the vow. It said, in plain English, that I, Daniel Charles Pierce, promised before God and the Whitcomb family that if I ever failed Marlene, in any way, in any season of our marriage, I would not abandon her. I would not contest her. I would not bargain with her. I would give her whatever she asked for, in full, without argument, and I would ask only one thing in return: that she sit with me in a room with the envelope open between us and tell me to my face what I had done wrong, not through a lawyer, not through a daughter, not through a piece of paper served at my office, face to face, with the vow between us. Eunice Whitcomb, 84 years old and dying of a heart she had given to 4 generations of difficult men, had known exactly what she was doing. She had not been protecting her granddaughter from me. She had been protecting our marriage from the silence that had killed her own. Judge Imelda Crane was a Whitcomb cousin on her mother's side. I did not know that. Theodore did not know that. Marlene had not known the judge would be assigned to the case. But Imelda Crane had recognized the handwriting of her great-aunt Eunice the moment the envelope was placed in her hand, and she had read the 4 words at the top of the page. And she had understood, before she even read the vow itself, exactly what document she was holding. That is why she closed the file. Not because the vow was legally binding. It wasn't. She could have granted the divorce in 5 minutes, and no appellate court in the country would have overturned her. She closed the file because she knew what Eunice had built, and she knew Marlene had never seen it, and she knew that if she granted the divorce that morning, on our anniversary, on those papers, she would be granting it to a woman who did not yet know the full weight of what she was ending. Marlene and I sat in a small conference room down the hall from courtroom 3B for 2 hours that afternoon. Theodore and Priscilla waited in the hallway. The envelope was open between us on the table. Marlene read the vow 3 times. She did not cry the first 2 times. The 3rd time, she put her face in her hands and she wept the way I had wept in the attic, and she said, "Daniel, why didn't you ever show me this?" And I said, honestly, the only true thing I had said in 3 weeks. I said, because I forgot. Because I thought if I loved you well, I would never need it. Because I was wrong. We did not reconcile that day. I want to be honest with you about that. Because the easy ending to this story is that we walked out of the courthouse hand in hand and renewed our vows at sunset. And life is not that easy, and neither was Marlene. She still wanted out in many ways. She had real grievances and I had real failures, and a piece of paper from 1999 did not undo any of them. But she did not refile the petition, not that month, not the next. We started counseling, together this time, both of us, with a woman named Dr. Henrietta Mao, who had no patience for either of our excuses. It took us 14 months to decide what to do with the marriage, and in those 14 months, I learned more about my wife than I had learned in 26 years, because for the first time in our lives we were talking with the envelope open between us. Not literally. Eventually, we put it back in its sleeve and gave it to Hollis to keep for her own marriage someday, if she chose. But the principle of it, the open envelope, the face-to-face, The no lawyers, no papers, no daughters in the middle. That stayed. We are still married. I will not pretend it is the marriage I thought I had on June 18th of that year. It is a different marriage. A quieter one. A more careful one. A more honest one. Marlene kept the name Pierce, but she kept it as a choice, not a default, and I have learned the difference between those two things. I think about Eunice Whitcomb often. I think about an 84-year-old woman at a rehearsal dinner in 1999, pressing a sealed envelope into the hand of a young man she did not yet trust, asking him to sign a promise he did not yet understand. I think about how she must have watched her own marriage and her daughters, and known something about silence that the rest of us had to learn the hard way. And I think about Judge Imelda Crane taking off her reading glasses, looking across a courtroom at a cousin she had not seen in 20 years, and saying 4 words that did not save my marriage but gave my marriage the chance to save itself. I cannot grant this. 4 words. 1 closed file. 1 opened envelope. 1 marriage. 26 years old on the morning it almost ended, still standing, quieter and stranger and truer. On the other side. If you are listening to this and there is an envelope in your life that you have never opened, or a vow you have never spoken out loud, or a person across the kitchen table you have stopped looking at, open it. Speak it. Look at them. Do not wait for a courtroom and a stranger in a black robe to do it for you. Eunice knew. The judge knew. I almost didn't learn in time. Don't be me. Open the envelope.